Leave a comment where you are listening in the world. Please subscribe if you enjoy our content. Enjoy! Story 1. This story is a little less painful than the last time, but this happened around 2 years after the first breakup. I was dating this guy who was a lot more out of the closet than I was at the time. He was my best friend at the time's older brother. When I would hang out with my friend, he would often keep to himself, and I don't know why, but something pulled me toward him. At first, it started with just chatting with him while my friends got ready to go somewhere. Just enjoying being able to make him smile was enough for me. But soon enough I managed to talk him into joining in when we hung out as a group. It was obvious that we were getting close, and almost all of my friends were pushing for the two of us to get together, my best friend especially. It was around Halloween when I had asked him out, and to my shock, he said yes. For the first year, I felt so alive just being around him, enjoying just being in his company, whether it be going on dates or just lounging around his house and watching a movie. It was so much so that I practically lived at my best friend's house, being that I still wasn't out to my parents and didn't want to have to explain me being only 17 and having a 19-year-old boyfriend to my father. It helped that the family supported us, feeling as if I was a member of the family myself. Things started changing when he built up a bit more confidence with himself and began to gain a group of his own friends. They were a bit older than him, and he looked up to them, so he started to change his personality as a way to impress them. It started out with small things like making slight jabs at me when they were around, and eventually just any time he pleased. He started to get pushy about me telling my parents that I was gay, so I wouldn't be lounging around his house all the time. It progressed to him trying his best to exclude me from hanging out in either friend group, lying about what he was doing, blowing off plans with me, or lying to my friends saying I couldn't go. I tried to brush off these actions and pretending that what was happening didn't hurt. It got to the point to where he would even get annoyed at me hanging out with my best friend at their home and completely ignoring me while he hung out with his older buddies. The only time I had heard him even speak of us being together was when he would make lewd comments regarding our sex life. One night my best friend was having a sleepover with me and two of our other friends, and like normal we stayed up until late into the morning, energized on energy drinks and soda. It was nice to hang out like old times again with my friends, and they seemed to agree with me. We were halfway through a weird conversation about some show or another when my boyfriend came home. The walls were thin in the house, so I could hear that he wasn't alone, and the group of us got quiet, us all being very nosy. As soon as they made it into the next room, my heart sank at the unmistakable sounds of him and another guy having sex. My friends were all honestly shocked and attempted to comfort me. At that point, I felt both sad and angry, but felt that storming into the room would do nothing more than give him the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. My friends tried to help me take my mind off of it with various distractions, but they could never silence the obvious sounds of my boyfriend and whoever he was with. I tried to pretend like I didn't hear it, not wanting the group to have their sleepover ruined by my drama, but no matter what, with each sound I could hear through the walls, my sadness turned into anger. Even after my friends crashed, I remained wide awake in the silence of the room with the sounds still very obvious. It wasn't long before the sounds stopped, and I see from the crack in the door my boyfriend's buddy, shirtless and disheveled, making his way to the front door. Long story short, I did not sleep that night, and by the next morning, I was still very angry. My boyfriend was heading out of state to look at a certain college he was hoping to attend, so he had to wake up pretty early. I was in the kitchen drinking some hot tea when he woke up. He shamelessly stumbled, half naked, into the kitchen, smelling of sex and cheap cologne to hide the scent. He was tugging on one of my old shirts that I had given him for his birthday and attempting to fix his hair like nothing had happened. "Hey babe, you stayed up all night again?" he asked in a groggy and familiar tone. He knew that I had a tendency not to sleep sometimes, occasionally losing track of time, so he didn't assume anything. I just saw him smiling at me the way he always did, and it just made me angrier, knowing he thought I hadn't caught on. "Think you could fix me a cup? I need to get on the road soon." I just stood up and walked around the bar into the kitchen area and pulled out the tea packets. I sat while the tea kettle boiled and had thoughts of throwing the hot liquid on him, but thought against that. When it began to whistle, I poured the hot water into his mug and went for the lemon juice he liked to put in his tea every morning. That was when my eyes landed on the lemon-flavored laxative that sat in the fridge. I fixed his tea all right, but instead of lemon juice, I poured a good amount of the liquid laxative into his cup, reading the instructions, of course, not wanting to kill him. I also added one of those sexual stimulants that sat on the counter. It was a gag gift from his dad for his last birthday that seemingly never left its spot on the counter. I stirred it really good before returning the tea to him, watching him gulp it down. He looked at the time, noting that he had to get on the road before traffic, pulling me into a kiss. I was disgusted by this, tasting another man on his lips as he left out the front. I watched him leave, waiting a good hour before sending him a voicemail, telling him that it was over. I later told my best friend about what I had done, and the two of us still share a laugh about it to this day. My now ex was really angry with me when he came home, since he said that he had accidentally soiled himself in traffic, and every time he had to make a pit stop his erection would accidentally fall into the water. I felt bad about it, but at the same time felt it is still a bit funny. My ex of course still gives me dirty looks when I come to visit, sometimes getting jealous when he hears me and my best friend talking about other guys. In the end, though, I am sad that things happened the way they did, but you have to learn from your experiences and grow from them. Story 2. Back when I was a kid, my grandmother had a really close friend who used to help her babysit us. One day she goes missing. Family doesn't know where she is, and we don't either. About a week later, police find her body in a dumpster. She had been dead for 4 to 5 days. She had been mugged and had several stab wounds. Incredibly tragic, who would mug an old lady? Here's the spooky story. A few days just before she was found, my 3 cousins swore they saw her walking around in their backyard and knocking on their window. The following day had search going through the area. It wasn't until the body was found that we realized what they saw couldn't be true according to police timeline, but they swore it was her. Edit. I'm adding more context for the story. I initially kept it brief because I didn't want to have a wall of text, but since this blew up a bit, I'll include more details. The backyard was actually pretty big and long because it was shared by the entire apartment complex, which had 4 units, 2 upstairs, 2 down. My cousins were in the downstairs unit on the left. Again, like I said in a different post, it was gated on all sides by wooden fencing. My cousin's window had blind spots, so you couldn't see the entire backyard. It wasn't night time, but the sun was setting. They said it was almost down at this point, so I assume around 7 p.m. They're in their room, which has a window that sees into the backyard. It was ghetto and they were pretty poor, so their beds only had the mattress, not the frame supporting it. It was a queen and a single pressed up against the wall with the window. So basically, to look into the backyard, you were standing up on a mattress looking against how you normally face, back against the wall, sitting down on the mattress. Youngest brother. Holy crap, there's someone in the back. She just walked away. Oldest, laying down on the bed, what are you talking about? Youngest, dude, it looks like old lady. She's walking around, where grandma's vegetable garden is. Youngest, come FING look. She's just walked away. Oldest, goes and looks, I don't see anything. Stop being stupid, goes back to laying down, little one stands there looking at him. Middle brother comes to look a moment later. Oh shit, she's right there. WTF, she's coming to us. They all look to see the lady knocking on the window. They scream, panic, and run out to Dad. Dad obviously doesn't believe them, but after a bit gives in. He goes out and checks, nothing. So just a side note, the way these apartments were connected, you couldn't go into the backyard from your individual unit. You had to get out into the main hall, which had a door that opened into the backyard. Another story to add here from a friend. My wife and I stayed at a nice hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. It was where I asked her to marry me after a lavish meal. I picked the room because it came with a huge Japanese soaking tub that me, a 6 feet 1 inch man, could barely see over the edge of. Anyway, the first night we stayed there, we were sleeping in the single king bed. I believe the alarm clock said it was 2 or 3 a.m. To my left, and just a few feet from me, I heard the sound of what seemed like a pencil slowly rolling down a sloped surface. It was so deliberate and loud that it woke us both up. It was also so deliberate that, while my heart thumped in my chest from the sudden noise, I quickly convinced myself that it was a pencil sliding off the desk in our room, and I went back to sleep. The next morning, to my surprise, I found that A, there were no pencils in the room, and B, there was no desk. It was my first night in the room, so I assumed that it, like other hotels, had a place to sit and write. Well, that was not the case. The only thing I could find to write with were ballpoint pens with their caps on. They wouldn't make that distinctive, loud noise that a ridged, wooden pencil makes as it rolls. Furthermore, there was no sloped surface in the room for anything to suddenly roll off of in the middle of the night/morning. The whole thing was weird enough for us to talk about it that morning. I do not believe in ghosts, but to be honest, I'd love to encounter something unexplained. I entertained the idea of a ghost pencil, but knew in my head it had an explanation grounded in reality. But that's not all that happened. That night we were both in the soaking tub. The water was up to my chin. It was great. We were in the middle of February, a cold and miserable month in Pittsburgh. We were sloshing around in the tub having a blast, pretending we were rich. And then, from the other room, we heard the buzzing of an old microphone hooked up to a PA system. Basically, that sound of feedback that precedes an announcement. The whole room filled with the buzzing sound of microphone feedback. Our hearts thumped in our chests yet again. And then we both practically jumped out of our own skins. We heard the distinctive sound of someone blowing into a microphone to test it. Huth-huoth. You could see it in your head. It was so distinctive, just like the pencil. My heart went from thumping wildly to thrumming like a hummingbird's. Naked, I leapt from the tub and threw a towel around myself. That was a man blowing into a microphone. I said. My wife stayed in the tub, scared and quiet. I searched our room and did not find a speaker, or any kind of speaker grill embedded into a wall or the ceiling. We could not for the life of us find a potential source for the sound other than an iHome speaker that was already playing music from my iPhone. So that was our story. We still had one more night. We were exhilarated by our engagement and the ghosts that haunted the hotel. A week later I had the thought to email the hotel. I asked them about their building. Pittsburgh is an old town, and downtown Pittsburgh is a very, very old town. They got back to me and explained, as my jaw dropped, that they used to be an old telephone factory. I don't know why I found meaning in that explanation, or why it made everything click so well. But my thoughts immediately went to the sounds of a factory, the PA system, the drafting table. All relics from another time in that building's life. Story 3. This was actually on a Danish highway with lots of traffic. I was riding my motorcycle and pulled over at a rest stop. The stop only had a parking lot and a toilet, no gas station or anything, and was hidden from view from the highway by trees. As I stopped, there was only one car in the parking lot. A man was standing next to it. He came over, and I thought he was just a tiny bit strange. He told me he was a German chemistry professor, but did not look the type. He had been sleeping in the trunk of his station wagon, and when he left through the rear hatch, he had left the keys inside, and the car was locked. He wanted to borrow my phone to call for assistance, and I let him use it. After the phone call, I was still talking to him, and he told me about the trip he was on. I was more or less trying to end the conversation, when a run-down van with graffiti on it stopped next to us. Out comes a man who looked a bit off, like a mix of 80s denim jacket gang member and a drug dealer. He opened with, "How much is that motorcycle worth?" I found that slightly threatening. He kept on talking about how nice my bike was, as well as telling me his life story. He told me he was a West German truck driver in the 80s, driving a route to East Germany. He had an East German girlfriend who he met every time he was there. But they were discovered by Stasi, and he never saw her again. He was convinced she was killed by Stasi because of her relationship with him, West German. At that point, he had moved to Norway and worked there as a butcher for 10 years. But then some things happened in my life, and I joined the Foreign Legion. Now, people don't just join the French Foreign Legion. The way he said it made me think he was saying that he did some serious crime, but escaped the police/prison by joining the Legion, which is apparently a thing. Now, at this point I was 100% convinced he was bullshitting me. I just did not understand what he was trying to achieve. Did he want to steal my bike? Or my wallet, phone? Meanwhile, the professor wanted to leave so bad, but he was still locked out of his car. Me and the crazy dude was speaking partly Danish/Norwegian, so he did not understand what we were talking about, but I guess you could say he understood enough to be a bit frightened. I wanted to pull on this crazy guy's strings a bit, so I asked him about something I'd heard about the Foreign Legion. That they give you a dog, and you have to care for the dog and have it as a pet, and then they make you kill it and eat it. He told me nope, that's not true. It's a rabbit, not a dog. And then he kept talking about it in a way that was very, very convincing. And then he pulls the ace out of his sleeve. Literally. He pulls up his sleeve and reveals a tattoo of a legionnaire of the French Foreign Legion, in uniform, covering his whole arm from elbow to wrist. I mean, non-legionnaires don't have that. I was still trying to figure out what he wanted. He had still not asked what me and the professor were waiting for. But just then, a roadside assistance truck arrived to help the professor, and the crazy guy realized the situation. And then became annoyed because if he had known, he could have picked the car door lock in seconds. I have equipment for it in my car. Anyway, the professor and the crazy Legionnaire became occupied with the locked car and the arrival of the roadside assistance truck. And I got on my bike and noped the fuck out of there. In the end of the day, I think he was genuinely a Legionnaire, butcher, and truck driver. I think he was a lonely guy just looking for conversation, but no longer used to civilian-friendly conversation. I'm sure he had hundreds of interesting stories to tell, but I would prefer to hear them in a less isolated place than a Danish rest stop. Another story to add. An old job I had was located on an industrial estate in the middle of an expansive, abandoned, and disused airfield. One of those places that even when the sun shone, if the estate was quiet, it was eerie. It was a small business, and because of the nature of the work, the main bulk got done in the morning, leaving the afternoons quiet and therefore only manned by 1 or 2 members of staff. On this particular day, it was just me as my colleague was out at a meeting. It was a sunshiny, normal day, and I'd been in the midst of doing very little, as you do when left to your own devices in a quiet office, when I decided to take a break to pee. Now, because of the weird layout of the building, to get to the toilets you went downstairs, took a right at a crossroads, the front door on your left, through the, at that point, empty warehouse, and followed the loop, leaving you directly under the main office. So there I am, having a grandiose wee when I hear the front door open and close. At this point, I'm not fussed. My colleague is due back in, so it's most likely them, and if it's not, it'll be one of the drivers anyway who quite often pop in and out. As I finish up and flush the toilet, I peer out the small window behind the loo to scout our section of the car park and just see who's arrived. Only, there's no cars bar mine. That's kinda odd, and I'm a little unsettled, but I shake the feeling off by figuring it's a nice day. Could just be a driver has walked round. As I move to the sink and start washing my hands, the floorboards above my head start making the very familiar creaks and groans of somebody ascending up the stairs, and I can tell exactly where they are by the sound of which stair they're putting weight on. So somebody's definitely in and heading to the office. For some reason, the weird unsettling feeling of earlier starts coming back over me, so I finish up doubly quick time and come out of the toilets, just as the main floorboard of the office creaks. I'm calling out all the time as I take the loop back around, and through the warehouse. As I reach the bottom of the stairs, there's nobody on them, and as I say, all the time I've been walking I've been calling out, figuring whoever it is would most likely stop and hang back to wait for me. But there's nobody. Now really creeped out, at the foot of the stairs I call out again, just in case they haven't heard, expecting somebody to poke their head around the main office door. Nobody does. There's just silence. By this point, I'm petrified. I'm on my own, in the middle of nowhere, and somebody has decided to play peekaboo in this building. With my heartbeat pounding in my ears, I take the first few steps. Alongside the stairs, there's a downstairs office and a small window that allows you to peek into the room. I check that. There's nobody in there. I carry on up, now fully on guard. At the top of the stairs there's another crossroads. Main office on the right, conference room, with shut door, on the left. I reach the landing of the stairs, fully tensed, with my keys in between my closed fist. I turn the corner. There's nobody there. The office is empty, but I have 100% heard somebody come in, and up the stairs. The door is so heavy that the sound of it opening or closing is unmistakable, plus the same for the floorboards, which always give away someone's movements. All the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The only place somebody could be is directly behind me, in the closed-door conference room, and there's no way I'm opening that. The room is massive and pitch black. I leg it downstairs just as my colleague pulls into the car park. I explain the whole thing to him, and together we brave the conference room. He pushes the door open. I hit the lights. Nobody. We scour the warehouse, even though there's no way that somebody could have got out. The shutter doors are down and locked. We check every room, everywhere. Nobody. To this day, it's the creepiest thing that I ever experienced in the building. I know what I heard. There was no way it could have been wind or heating, because the floorboards make specific noises when people are on them. I'd know. I'd heard them enough times. There was no way that anybody could have gone past me, whether in the warehouse or not, as the corridor is so small I would have seen them, or heard the door click again when they left. I've got no explanation. All I know is what I heard. Story 4. So to begin, the players in this story are myself, fiancé, fiancé's mom. Time frame, 2013 to 2016. It has obviously been several years since the incident, and I literally have never told anyone in my new life about this. Tonight I have some good wine to drink, and figure I'll let my fingers do the talking. I thought I had met the perfect woman. We met in the last year of college. We met at a party, and hit it off instantly. She was a beautiful blonde with sun-kissed skin, and she could have been a model. Think Kate Upton type figure. She was kind, compassionate, sympathetic, good listener, and had an active life with many friends. She liked my friends, and it was awesome over the 3 years we knew each other and how our friend groups merged. Several of our friends began dating each other. It was some of the best times of my life. I was on for a post-grad in finance, and she had a degree in contractual law. This is just to say we ended up being successful in our own rights. But I'm no slouch in the looks department either. 5 feet 11 inches, 190 pounds, and liked the gym. I wasn't a super athlete, but let's just say I was built. But I was very shy, and didn't have a lot of prior relationships prior to meeting her. The first evening we met, we were smitten. First night we talked all night. Then it went to texting/phone calls daily, then dates weekly, then after a year, when I started working my new job, she moved in. I loved her family, and her family loved me. Mostly her mother, as her father was standoffish, as he was to everyone. It was a whirlwind romance. After 2.5 blissful years of overseas vacations, hiking trips and luxury vacations, I proposed to her. She said yes. I was over the moon. She was doing all the planning for the wedding. We were talking about our futures together, buying a house, children and family trips that we were going to take together, and all such things like that. Then it happened. One evening after we both get home to our apartment, she is a little distant. I think I noticed it right away, as we were always very affectionate towards each other. This would only happen about once a week for the first month, after proposal. Then it was more frequent. I would have been none the wiser, except that I used to listen to a lot of Reddit on YouTube. So, I waited and observed. These bouts of ignoring me would only last a couple of hours, then she would be right back to normal. But after 6 months, wedding in a year, she was like this almost every night. Sex was still great. Relationship with her parents still great. But over Thanksgiving at her parents' home in Louisville, Kentucky, we lived just north of D.C., she was standoffish towards me in front of her mother. Now her mother was a very observant woman. She pulled her daughter aside to talk to her, and I could hear them arguing. After some heated but muffled words, they returned to the rest of the family and carried on like nothing was going on. I figured I could ask her about it later and did. She was not willing to talk about it and asked me to wait till we were home to discuss it. I agreed, as I loved her deeply and thought we could work through anything. Her mother was an older version of her. Same stunning looks, just a few grays in her long, thick blonde hair. This is important later. Back home I asked her about it, and she was unwilling to discuss it. When pressed on it for a week, she finally confessed that a guy at her work was trying to get to know her better. She wanted to be forthcoming, so she showed me her phone, and as I looked through it I noticed that all the texts that would have happened during the time she was withdrawing from me were removed. There was nothing untoward in the texts. But I did go into her phone settings and turned on her locator on her phone, as we shared the same phone plan. And I honestly thought it would make me see that she was not doing anything wrong. Was I wrong? That second weekend after Thanksgiving, she had a company Christmas party. I had planned on going, but came down with food poisoning and had to back out. She had a girlfriend pick her from our apartment, as they planned on drinking. Alada had a DD for the evening. We had planned on going out all night, so I told her to have a blast, and I would see her in the morning. So, as I'm puking my guts out and barely able to get off the toilet for more than 30 minutes, I grabbed my phone and watched her location. First it was a restaurant, then the venue of the company party, then a bar. None of this alarmed me until I saw her phone stop in a downtown hotel. At this point I was miserable in more ways than 3. Projectile vomiting out my butt, mouth, and now soul. I finally fell asleep due to sheer exhaustion at 2 a.m. At 7 a.m. I awoke and saw she was still at the hotel. At noon she finally comes home, and I am on the mend. She loves me up, and I asked her about the previous night without mentioning anything about knowing her locations. She talks about the restaurant, party, the bar, but then says she went to her girlfriend's house to crash for the evening. First lie. For the next 3 months, she has to start working later, and later 3 to 4 days a week. As I start asking her about it, she becomes more and more defensive. I talked to her mom one evening, when fiancé didn't come home until late. I asked her mom about the Thanksgiving conversation, and she admitted to me that she thought her daughter might be stepping out of our relationship because of how she read her body language. She also said that her daughter was being more and more distant with her in their weekly texting conversations. With all this speculation that was going on in my mind, I kept it to myself. 2 weeks later at work, I ended up getting a new project at my company that was going to require me to fly to the Midwest Monday through Friday for the next 5 weeks starting in 2 weeks. It came with an increase in salary, and as I broke the news to my fiancée, she was delighted for me. I didn't think, though, that she was excited for the same reasons I was. So, I went online and ordered 4 motion-activated spy cameras for my apartment. I put one in the living room/entry area, one in the kitchen, one in our bedroom, and one looking down our hallway. They were very small and connected to the internet via a hidden network, so they couldn't be spotted on the Wi-Fi network. I secured the cams with a password and waited. On my first week out, she had girlfriends over the first 2 nights and never worked late once. The third night a guy came over. I was enraged. I'm sitting there in my hotel room screaming at the monitor and calling her every name in the book. Then they went all the way, first on the couch, then in our bed. She bent for ways for him that I didn't know were possible. What was the worst was as I am watching them get it on, I call her to see how her day went. She hears her phone ringing and holds her hand up for him to stop giving her anal and answers the call. I ask why she is breathing heavy and said she was at the gym working out. As soon as the call is over, she goes right back to doing the dirty. When I got home Friday evening, I ignored her and went right to bed, and early Saturday got up and went cycling. I was so upset that I didn't even realize that I biked over 50 miles from our apartment. The furthest I had biked before was 30 miles, but that day I went 105.6 miles. Getting back absolutely exhausted, I showered. Then she and I went out that evening and had fun with our friends and had a lot to drink. Is it breakup sex when the one you're going to break up with is oblivious? I was bursting inside. Heartbreak, anger, rage, feelings of betrayal all swirled around in my heart and mind. She, who used to be so attentive, was oblivious to all this. It hurt so much because I loved her so much. I finally confided in one of our mutual friends, and he told me that they all knew about it for months. I was finally told. They all felt sorry for me, but no one again said a damn thing to me, which is why they stopped inviting us out with them. I hadn't noticed it before, but I could look back and see that about 3 months prior they gradually invited us/me less and less. So, I figured I would try and win her back. The next weekend I planned the entire weekend as a complete weekend of spoiling her in every way. Wined and dined, pampering, massages, rubs, and talking to her about future plans and about how much I loved her. I knew I was starting to break through when after her 4th glass of wine she started to cry, and I could tell the guilt was coming up to the surface. I asked her what was wrong, but she would choke up every time she tried to speak. I then told her that if she did something in her past, or was having some kind of conflict in her mind, that she needed to speak to me about that, I was more than willing to talk with her about it, and if forgiveness was needed, then I was more than willing to forgive and move on. The only words that came out of her mouth in her was how much she loved me. It actually hurt to hear that from her, as I now had 4 separate videos of her and the other guy in our apartment getting it on. Over the next 8 weeks of traveling to the Midwest, the trips lasted for what would be 10 weeks. I recorded over 41 hours of her having sex with what I found out was her co-worker. She never worked late once while I was gone. I tried every weekend to be extra attentive, and each week she got more and more distant. After watching this for 8 weeks, I was done, so I devised a 12-step getaway plan. Gather evidence. Get her out of the way in order to execute my plan. I scheduled a 2-week exclusive getaway trip for us at an all-inclusive resort, Barbados. She was ecstatic. Then a week before the trip, I claimed I had to back out and told her to take a friend. I knew it was over when she showed no disappointment that I couldn't go. She scheduled coworker to go with her. Terminate our apartment lease. It would expire 3 days into her trip, and I was the sole signature on the lease. Find a job in another town. The company I had been assisting in the Midwest had offered me a job with a slight increase in salary. Find a new place to live. I got an apartment in the above said location. When she is gone, perform the following. 6. Take her to the airport, go back home and pack all her things same day. Saturday 7. Get a new phone number/phone/email. Cancel all social media. Monday 8. Separate us completely in regard to finances. Withdrew all monies from our joint accounts and then closed them. I put all her money in an envelope and packed it in her things. Monday 9. Have the movers pack all my things up and ship it west. Monday 10. Take all her things to her mother's house 600 miles away. All my fiancé's belongings fit into the back and bed of my F-250 crew cab. Tuesday through Saturday. 11. Give her mother the evidence. 12. Start my new life. I didn't want to do anything that was illegal, so I made sure that nothing of hers was missing. It was so hard to pack all her stuff nice and neatly away. I never cried so hard in my life. I have read so many times on Reddit about SOs saying they will never do it again when caught, but they don't stop. My hope was that she would genuinely confess, so we could forgive and move on. She never did. Twice she came really close, but her secret was too hard for her to reveal. Tuesday morning, I left our apartment north of DC for the last time. It took 10 hours to get to her mom's house. What happened when I got there I was not prepared for. I arrived at her mom's house around 8 in the evening. I figured she would be surprised to see me, since I was coming down unannounced. Since they lived in a gated community, I had to buzz her house from the front gate, so she was waiting for me outside when I drove up. I could tell that she had been crying when I walked up to see her. I asked her what was wrong, and she hugged me, bawling that she thought her husband was cheating on her with a much younger, skinnier, and prettier woman. Dumbfounded, I just held her for what was probably 10 minutes. She soaked my right shoulder with her tears and snot. When she finally composed herself, I asked if we could go in a talk. We went in and I asked where her husband was, and she indicated that he said he was going fishing with his buddies at a remote cabin an hour away. Then she said, he hates fishing. She gave me all the indications that she had picked up on, and apparently it had been going on for about a year. So, doing a little bit of research, we found a credit card hold charge for a 5-star hotel that was only 20 minutes away. On call later confirmed her husband was in fact there for a 4-night stay cheating with his mistress. 2 peas in a pod. I said, what? She responded, 2 peas in a pod. I said again, your husband is cheating on you, and your daughter is cheating on me. That's why I came here to drop her stuff off and move to XXXX. I showed her the evidence in a binder on screen captures I had made. After looking at the first 3 or 4 pages, she looked at me dumbfounded. We both hugged and cried for a good 30 minutes. At that point she said stop crying and looked at me and said, well, tonight there is nothing we can do about it except for you and I to knock out these 3 bottles of Moscato and fuck in every room of the house. She grabbed 2 wine glasses and a bottle of Moscato wine and walked out to their private pool deck saying, are you coming out here or are you going to get fucking revenge? Now I won't go into much detail because I don't want to get blue balls, but that night and for the next 3 days we fucked nonstop. I put myself in every hole her beautiful body could offer. I must have C*** met in, or on her 25 plus times in that period. After those days were over, we passionately said goodbye and I drove to my new destination. She kept me informed as to everything that happened when now ex-fiancé got back. The day fiancé got back was epic. I canceled my phone the morning of the day she got back. So when the plane landed and she called for a ride, it indicated the phone was disconnected. She apparently had her lover take her home. He dropped her off and left. When she came to the door, a strange couple, new tenants, answered the door and she freaked out. I can't tell you how many times she tried to call me, because again the number was no longer valid. She went to her girlfriend's to stay for a time as co-worker was already married. When she called her mom in a panic, her mom told her that I had come down and dropped off all her things and mentioned that all her monies were down there as well, 600 miles away. Her mom didn't tell her that she had ked me more in 3 days than fiancé, and I had in the last 6 months. But she did tell her that she knew that she was cheating on me, and I said I had found a new job, place to stay, and new career far away from her and all the friends we had, and that her mother was separating from her father due to infidelity. Apparently she cried for days and took a week off of work, but alas she found comfort in the arms of her married lover. Her mom never let her know where I was at. I had completely cut off that part of my life. The only link I had to that old life was fiancé's mom, and she has kept our secret to this day. Fiancé was ghosted the most. Story 5. My high school used to be a giant mansion before it was converted into an orphanage, and then a high school. One section of the school, the 3rd floor, was inaccessible. The staircase which led to the floor was blocked off with wood and painted black to match the chorus room where it was located. In 2003, during the fall school show of Les Mis, they had to remove the wood so they could replace the windows on that 3rd floor. We even ended up using some of the removed windows for our barricade. We had play practice most nights, and if you lived far enough away, usually you would just stay at the school and wait rather than go home. just to come right back up. While waiting for practice to start one night, myself and 3 friends Ryan, Mike and Michelle decided to go up the staircase to check out the 3rd floor. The staircase was rotted and falling apart from years of disuse, so we carefully went up one at a time to find an unremarkable hallway with some even less remarkable rooms off to the sides. All of this lead into a big open area with old, stacked desks and folders full of test papers from like the 80s or something. The 4 of us were a bit disappointed because the rumor was that this section of the school was not converted from the orphanage that occupied the space several decades earlier, and the ghosts of orphans still haunted the place. Since we didn't get spooked, we ended up just digging through the old papers. While Michelle was looking through the papers in a side room with her back to us, Ryan pushed Mike and myself out of the room quietly and into an adjacent room to scare Michelle into thinking we disappeared. Sure enough, she comes bolting out of the room screaming at us, throwing out "fuck you guys," and this isn't funny. We had to muffle our mouths to keep from laughing when all of a sudden, one of the people in the room fucking ruined the whole thing by giggling like a little girl. I turned to Ryan and Mike to see which one of them ruined the joke, but both of their hands were over their mouths, and their eyes were wide as dinner plates. This room we were in, hiding behind the door, was small, maybe the side of a small, one-stall bathroom. Maybe that's what it was once upon a time. And somebody in this goddamn tiny room was giggling, and it was none of us. This whole plot played out in probably like 10 seconds between leaving Michelle and hearing the giggle. So we stood there staring at each other waiting for something to happen that explained this. It was like 4 or 5 p.m., and we were the only ones in the chorus classroom the entire day. We would have seen someone go upstairs. We would have heard the stairs creaking as they went up there. Whoever giggled at us from inside that room was up there already. Unfortunately, we didn't get the explanation we needed because a second set of giggles started happening, this time more than one person making them. That was it for Ryan, a big, tough former athlete turned show kid, who screamed the highest pitched scream I've ever seen a guy that size make. It would have been funny if we weren't terrified. He pushed past us, ran screaming out into the hallway, scared the daylights out of Michelle on his way down, and we bolted down the steps. This time, we did not take them one by one, and actual chunks of rotted wood started falling off. We explained what happened to Michelle, and then went somewhere that was not the Krause classroom until play practice started. The maintenance team must have known we were up because we all collectively got a talking to about going up there. Safety concerns with the rotted steps. So of course, people started going up there willy-nilly hoping to see a ghost. There are more stories about that 3rd floor during that year that promptly stopped once they replaced the windows and sealed the room back up. Now the school is closed and empty, so whatever ghosts were having a good time are now free to do so without the living getting in the way. Story 6. I live in an area that has a lot of native history, and originally typed it up after another member in the group posted his experiences as a security guard in the same living complex. I never had paranormal experiences until living in this apartment. My dad bought a condo on the ground floor of a large 2-tower condo complex in the mid-2000s and did an absolutely beautiful renovation. After his divorce, he rented it out for several years. He had bad luck over and over with tenants, would not stay more than a couple months, and repeatedly did not pay rent. In fall of 2008, I moved in and rented the 2nd bedroom to a young woman. Visiting my dad when he and my stepmom still lived there, I never spent enough time to really notice anything, nor was my brain attuned to the paranormal. Even after the renovation, the condo had a dark, creepy vibe which I never thought much of and attributed to being on the ground floor with lots of trees and a stream outside. For exactly a year from fall 2008 to 2009, I didn't experience much. I later asked the roommate who lived there, about 3 months, if she had any experiences, and she said she always felt that she was being watched, particularly from the stream. There were 3 seemingly insignificant things that happened during this year that made me for a moment wonder if the apartment was haunted, but I never put much thought into it at the time. The first was the fan. I lived in the master bedroom with a small office area attached, where I kept the cat litter box. There was a ceiling fan in there with the wall switch that let you select off/low/med/high. Every time I would turn it off, it would go on high. Or I'd turn it on medium, and it would go off. Easy to chalk up to faulty electrical wiring, so I never put much thought into it. The second incident during that time was a little more frightening, but brush-offable. I was in a long-distance relationship at the time. One night as I was falling asleep, in that zone between wakefulness and dreamland, I heard my name called from a very specific spot on the ceiling in a disembodied version of my boyfriend's exact voice. Jerked me awake saying WTF, but I didn't lose too much sleep. The third odd thing that happened in the apartment can easily be explained as a plumbing disaster. For that year I pretty much only used the green bathroom in the hallway. The master bath creeped me out. I came home one day to bad flooding from the toilet that was restricted to only the bathroom. The insurance guys came, ripped up all the wood flooring from the main door to all of the master bedroom, somehow leaving the bathroom tile intact. Determined there was absolutely no way the plumbing could have malfunctioned and refused to replace anything, leaving a $10,000 job to my dad out of pocket after destroying the house. This has always been a bit of a head-scratcher and just added to the oddness and weirdness of this place. My dad never replaced the flooring, and I walked on concrete the rest of my time there. After the flooding, for the rest of my time there, the green bathroom was really humid and warm, musty smelling. This will be important later. I still use that bathroom, but not as much. Fast forward a year. Long-distance guy and I break up. Life goes on during this time. No more incidents that I can recall in the apartment. One important person to this story was a security guard. I'll call her Pam. She knew us from growing up there and was always friendly when I drove in and out. In fall of 2009, I was dating a new guy named Matt who had just moved from California. A nice, good, positive dude. I'm not super woo-woo, but I think most of us can agree that everything in life is some sort of energy, and spirits/paranormal is the best example of that. Adding or subtracting people, energies, or drastically changing an environment such as renovating can throw off the balance of energy. When Matt moved in is when shit started getting weird. October of 2009. I remember this night like it happened yesterday. I borrowed my dad's car for the night and needed to register it with security. Pam was working. She was making small talk as she was filling out the form, not looking at me, and casually asked, "Did you get your place cleansed yet?" Gut punch to my stomach. Everything flooded into my head at once, and I knew. I started shaking and asked, "What do you mean?" She looked up at me and said, "When you moved in, I told you to get that place cleansed." I said, "I probably thought you said cleaned." "No," she said, "cleansed. Spiritually." I flipped the F out. I burst into tears. Everything I knew deep down and never acknowledged about this apartment was true. I refused to go back into the apartment that night and asked Matt to get me overnight stuff to stay at my mom's. It turned out that Pam was Wiccan and offered to do a full cleansing of the apartment the next night. So the next night rolls around. Pam, me, armed with bags of sage, Matt, and two new people. Tiffany, a girl who had lived in the same apartment growing up. Apparently my dad bought it when her dad sold it, and was now into semi-professional ghost hunting due to her experiences in that apartment growing up. WTF, and her girlfriend. Tina had an EMF, device that registers supernatural activity, and a recording device, which we placed on the coffee table in the enclosed patio. Pam led us through the house. We repeated what she said, asking any negative spirits to leave, etc. Nothing odd happened. They left, and Matt and I went to bed. Good to go, right? A few days later, Pam called me. Tiffany caught something on the recording. I met Tiffany in the lobby. She now lived in the other tower in the complex, in a different, less haunted apartment. She played the recorder from the night of the cleansing. You can hear Pam chanting / leading us starting from the kitchen, and us repeating. As we slowly walked through the enclosed patio and past the coffee table with the recorder on it, a woman's voice screams directly into the recorder, "Get out." From here on out is where my timeline starts to shuffle, because it's not really relevant, nor do I remember in what order everything happened unless otherwise noted. Stuff happened on a daily basis. I wish I'd written it all down at the time, but I didn't. We did 8 or 10 cleansings over the year with little change. This is all what I remember off my head. There was a period of about 3 to 4 months where things got so bad that I took my cat and moved to my mom's house. She'd already heard the recordings that I'd borrowed from Tiffany and let me stay. During this time, Tiffany and I set up the recorder on the counter over the washer/dryer to see if we could catch anything while I was away. We did. It's important to note here that I was the only person who had a key. Neither the resident manager or even my dad had a key. I remember this specifically because I had to call a locksmith one day when I locked myself out. Anyway, the recording. A ghost family was living in the house. Sounded like they were possibly from the 40s/50s era. We caught about 8 distinct voices on the recording. A woman who liked to sing, a woman with yippee chihuahua-like dogs, no dogs near me in the apartments, a woman who was chronically coughing tuberculosis, a little boy who ran up and down the hallway, a man speaking in the local dialect and doing laundry, people cooking, talking about mundane life stuff. The coughing lady would repeatedly speak directly into the recorder, softly saying, "Help me, help me." This went on for weeks. First, I'd like to preface this story by saying that I consider myself a pretty rational person. I understand intrinsically that there has to be some explanation for it, but I don't know what it is. Okay, when I was 11, I went to a summer camp type place with my classroom for 4 days. I don't remember the name, but I do remember that every one of the kids had immediate weird vibes when we got there. Lots of kids waking up crying wanting to go home, meltdowns, general not fun when it should have been fun. Kids wandering off into the woods. Camp counselors miserable. One night, I woke up to the sound of tapping on the window. At first I thought it was just a branch or something, but the tapping followed a rhythm. It went tap 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 tap. Once I figured out that it wasn't random, I got more scared than I've ever been in my life. Were we being pranked by another cabin? I ran into the nook our counselor slept in and started to wake him up. The clock next to him was deep into early morning, maybe 3 a.m. He woke up and got mad at me, telling me to go back to bed. I understood that it wasn't a prank at that point. I went and laid in my bed. Soon after it started again. Eventually it stopped. I was terrified and didn't go back to sleep. The next day shit was weird. It's normal for kids to be scared, but I was caught on some questioning my own morality type shit. I refused to go canoeing cause I was convinced we would die. If I was near the woods, I was overcome with a desire to walk deep into them, and that terrified me more. This wasn't normal little kid scared shit. This was a deep existential acceptance of the possibility of my own death. And I feel like 11 is kinda young for that, but maybe not. The whole trip I couldn't hang. Even on the school bus back, I was convinced something would happen to the bus. I didn't feel normal for weeks. Everyone I talked to about it denied it. They were sleeping. The other cabins had no clue. There was no pranking going on to corroborate the possibility of that being it. It had to be something rational, but for the life of me, I don't know what it is. The space next to the window was free of branches. Maybe it was a deer. Who knows? Story 7. This is a good one, and it's 100% true. I won't give the exact location, but it was in Rhode Island about 10 years ago. I was working overnight security at a boatyard. They assembled tugs, and there were numerous docks and very large warehouses where things were assembled. The job was great as I could essentially play video games / do homework all night, minus a 20-minute walkabout every 2 hours. The only problem with this job was the totally bizarre and creepy things that continually happened while on shift. You have to understand a large, rusty, foggy industrial yard like this late at night in near total dark minus the lights you turn on, then off, plays tricks on people's minds. And I, for one, am a very logical, science-oriented person. Yet we went through probably about 35 to 40 guards in the year and a half I was there, the latter half being lost to other posts despite being paid double at this one for much, much less work. While working there I heard all kinds of stories, but I'll give you some of the ones I personally experienced. One night while patrolling one of the assembly warehouses, I heard something following me from above. It was the strangest thing. I couldn't find the source of the noise, but every time I turned around, I could hear something scatter and run. Something big. Go back to the security room and look through the cameras, and it's a massive damn cat. Some sort of mountain lion. I had to call animal control, and they hunted and caught the damn thing like 5 hours later. The next night it's back. I can see it in the cameras and call again. This time they couldn't catch it. At one point I was actually directing animal control to the thing which I could see on the camera, and they were walking around right past it. They never ended up with the second catch. This then happened on a third night. I almost got my ass in hot water before one of the responding animal control guys sat down right next to me trying to direct his buddy. To this day I still don't know what the fuck was going on with that. We never caught the second ghost lion thing, though it would return when the weather was warm. Another night I was walking across one of the large, empty sections of the yard and was hit in the leg by a wrench. A large 5-pound wrench. Hit me hard enough where I stumbled and almost went down. Thing is, there was literally no place this could have fallen from, the nearest roof a goodly distance away. Someone would have had to have tossed it like a football to hit me with it. There was one night I was taking a shit in one of the stalls, and I heard the super large hangar open despite the controls for it being locked. I was weirded out, but decided to finish my shit, then investigate. It then closed again, then opened. Then as I'm getting ready to wipe my ass and troubleshoot this thing, the bathroom door rips open, slamming hard enough to give me a heart attack, and every stall door slams open. Given we were on the docks, there were a lot of seagulls. Occasionally one or two would sit on the end of the pier and watch us do rounds. One night a small flock of them, probably about 5 to 10, flew into a really compact ball. It was super weird. I've never seen them do that before. They then proceeded to follow me around at a set distance. If I approached, they went away. When I walked away, they followed. When I went into the guard shack, they all landed on the roof. Weirdest damn thing. The last example I'll give was one of the few deaths that happened on site. A worker not wearing a harness doing a warehouse roof repair fell through and landed on some machinery a good 40 feet below. He was dead by the time the ambulance got there. The following day, the roof caved in on the CEO's office during an international conference call, sending him to the hospital. The weird thing is the main office building was new construction with no maintenance issues whatsoever. Story 8. This happened in the summer of 2004 when I was about 14, and is kind of a long story, so forgive me. A little backstory. My family had just bought a brand new house in a very small, just 2 streets, guard-gated community of tract McMansions, located at the bottom of a canyon about 30 minutes north of Los Angeles that is known for its sharply winding roads. People got into accidents on the roads all the time, and it was not incredibly uncommon for me to wake up in the night to the sounds of screeching brakes or the thundering echo of a crash. The house was shaped like a sideways U, with the front door and 2 rooms we called the side rooms taking up the front line, and with the garage extending off the back line of the house, the kitchen/living room area, with a long driveway curving around the side of the house to it. Glass French doors lined a courtyard on the inside of the U, which is where the stairs were located. I promise this is relevant. One night, one of my best friends who lived up the street walked over to our house to hang out with my sisters and I, with his new Ouija board. My mom freaked out and wouldn't let it in the house because she's very superstitious, so we decided to play with it on our driveway. We talked to a ghost and asked where it had died, and it spelled out the name of the canyon we lived in. We asked how, and it said car. My friend asked, despite my protests, if the ghost lived on my property, and it said yes. I told myself that it was my friend dicking around, and that ghosts aren't real, and I have some friends who are into paranormal stuff who have since told me that Ouija boards are bullshit. So maybe it was just that I was more perceptive after that, but the shit that happened next was real and scary. A couple of days later, my family went to the beach, but I had to stay home because I was doing a correspondence course for summer school and was behind on homework. I always felt spooked when I was home alone because the house was so big and echoey, so I decided to do my homework sitting on the stairs because it was the most central and bright place in the house, and I could see most of the rooms through the previously mentioned glass doors. I had been sitting there a while when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone dressed in white walk past the courtyard and into the garage. We were still having light work done on the house, so I figured my mom had forgotten to tell me that the painters were coming that day. I got up to go make sure they had everything they needed, but upon standing and getting a full view of the garage door, I realized it was closed. But I know I had just seen somebody walk straight in there. Just then, I heard my normally very calm dogs freaking out in the backyard. I ran outside to see what was up, only to find them barking furiously at a wall in our side yard. As I was attempting to calm them down, I heard loud clattering and banging coming from inside the house, and then sudden silence. Every hair on my body was standing on edge, and I felt like I'd been dunked in ice water. At this point, I was pretty positive I was being robbed, so I ran out the side gate and sprinted as fast as I could to my neighbors who were on their lawn across the street, and explained through tearful gasps what I'd seen and heard. His wife called my family and told them to come home since I was obviously distressed, and he grabbed a golf club and went back to the house with me to check it out instead of just calling the police like I'd wanted to. They thought I'd just spooked myself and overreacted, and didn't really believe there was anyone in the house because it was a very safe community, and they noticed, as I had failed to earlier, that there were no strange cars in my driveway or on the street. We had a clear view of my house from the neighbors, so we'd have seen if anyone had driven away. When we got inside, it was to find that every closet and cupboard on the inside of the first story of the house was open, and every chair had been moved straight back, exactly 3 feet from its original place. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Nothing had been rummaged through, nothing was missing, and no one was there. We called the front gate, and the guard swore that no one who didn't live in the community had gone in or out yet that day. The time that had elapsed between me going into my backyard and returning with my neighbor couldn't have been more than 5 minutes or so, and it would have taken much longer than that for a person to move all of the chairs in so precise a manner. We're talking 8 chairs in the dining room, 6 around the kitchen table, and 4 bar stools at an island in the kitchen, all moved the exact same way and all heavy wood. And we'd have seen them leave even if they had. My parents got home and decided not to bug the police since nothing was missing or damaged, and chalked it up to a neighborhood kid pulling a prank. Even though I knew every kid who lived there, and they all swore they hadn't done it, and we'd have seen them if they had. Nothing that big ever occurred again, but smaller things occurred throughout the time we lived there. My sister swears to this day that the medicine cabinet in her bathroom would slam open and closed on its own occasionally. My older brother, a big guy who is not easily scared, would sleep on the couch in one of the front rooms when he was visiting from school. The first few times it happened, he'd wake me up in the middle of the night looking visibly shaken, saying someone was trying to get in the front door, and that the knob was rattling violently. We looked out my window, which was above the front door, but no one was there. He was so freaked out, he begged me to let him sleep in my room. After a while, I'd just wake up in the morning to find him sleeping on my trundle bed sometimes. We both knew why. There was no need to wake me up every time it happened. We moved a few years later and haven't had an experience like that since. A story to add here from another experience from a friend. I work as an assistant in nursing, and as a large male I tend to get what is called the companion cares, which is essentially having someone with a patient 24/7 who might be confused/agitated/aggressive, etc. Anyway, I got a handover of the patient who had gone completely troppo the previous night from some unintended effects of anesthesia. I'll admit, I'm actually pretty good at calming people down, and I believe most of it comes down to just listening to what these people want. For this guy it meant letting him investigate under chairs/beds etc. for cobwebs that weren't actually there. Later that night, he looks at me as if he'd seen a ghost and said there was something on the wall. It's important to understand at this stage that I had broken through what I call the realization stage. In other words, I had gained his trust enough that I was able to remind him that just about anything he was seeing was effects of the anesthesia. But this time he swore black and blue that there was something crawling up the wall. I decided to prove there was nothing by running my hand along the length of the wall. As I was doing this, I reached a spot in the wall where it felt as though something had crawled along the back of my hand. The hair on my neck instantly stood up, but without freaking out I kept going along the wall and stated, "There's nothing there. Remember, you may still be seeing things." He then asked me to just go back a bit, which I did, eventually reaching the spot again, at which point he yelled, "There, right there. Can't you see it?" Of course, I vehemently denied there was anything there, but secretly cried like a little girl inside. Story 9. Way back in the early 2000s, I began to suspect that my wife was up to something. Our 2 kids were about 4 and 6, still young, but not so young they couldn't tell you something about what had happened in their day. They started talking a lot about staying with my wife's parents during the day, which wasn't really that strange in and of itself. But since they lived about 90 minutes away, doing so 2 or 3 times a week seemed a bit much. That was basically every day she wasn't working at her part-time job. When I asked her about it, she denied it, but was never a good liar. So, I started tracking the mileage on her car, and sure enough, she was driving an extra 400 or so miles per week. I knew some shit was going on. Then one day I sat down at the computer, and she had left a sticky note with her AOL password written on it next to the keyboard. I could not resist and logged in to read her emails, and saw a few email exchanges between her and her college BFF, where they discussed how my wife was regularly fucking one of her ex-BFs from high school. No mention of details about him other than my wife also talking shit about his wife making fun of how she'd gotten fat after having kids. Anyway, I printed out these email exchanges and stashed them. I still needed to know the details, so I called a friend who was a cop, and he suggested I call a guy he knew that had left the force to become a PI. Ron was great. I paid his retainer and gave him the emails and what little I knew about my wife's activities, and he figured out exactly what she was doing. His report detailed with photos and times/dates/locations, all about how she would take the kids to her parents, then go meet this guy for lunch. Then they'd go to a dumpy motel for a few hours, after which she'd pick up the kids and return home. At this point, I hired a divorce lawyer. My parents cheated on each other, and the fallout absolutely fucked mine and my siblings' childhood. It was something that was totally unacceptable. I also asked Ron to find out what he could about this guy. Ron absolutely came through. I learned his name, Bob, that he was married and had 3 kids. I also found out that he worked as a VP of sales for his father-in-law's business. At this point, I had my lawyer draw up the divorce papers. I also asked Ron for a couple more copies of his report, and one more thing I wanted him to do for me. On the same day I had my wife served with the divorce papers at her work, I had Ron meet with this guy's wife and show her everything he'd found out. She seemed nice, and I figured that she deserved to know what her dear hubby was up to. What she did with that information was up to her. While the information about my wife's infidelity didn't really matter in my divorce proceedings, Bob's wife did a real number on him. According to the publicly available court documents from the divorce and other related proceedings, she cleaned out their joint account, took the kids, and left. As soon as her dad found out what he'd done, Bob was fired, and since her parents actually owned the house where Bob and his wife lived, he also got evicted. Their divorce was ugly. Lots of fighting in, and evidently out of court. I guess Bob went to the house and started arguing with his wife, and it escalated to the point that her brother stepped in, and Bob got his nose broken. There were restraining orders, a few more incidents with police reports, criminal charges, jail time, and so on. I can't find Bob on the internet anywhere these days. Last I heard, he'd left the state and his ex-wife did okay. She went to work at her dad's company and took over after he retired. As for me, my ex and I got along well enough. I didn't engage with her on anything that wasn't related to the kids, and now that they're both adults, I don't talk to her at all anymore. I don't hate her or anything, but I only care in the context that she is my kids' mom and is important to them, nothing beyond that. Story 10. In 2008, I met this awesome girl in school. Let's call her CR. I was 21 and she was just about to turn 19, and we both knew what love was for the first time in our lives. We were both going to a community college, me for theater design and her for education. We lived about half an hour apart. Come to think of it, that slight distance was actually pretty nice because being home at least forced us to focus on homework and taking care of ourselves, and visiting each other at home was that much more special. CR graduated with her associates in 2009 and moved away to a state school to finish up her degree in early childhood special education. Like before, the distance was not a concern because it was a short train ride away, and I'd spend 1 or 2 weekends a month down there with her. I proposed to her on Valentine's Day, 2010. School wasn't really my thing, and I ended up enlisting in the USAF that following May and got moved halfway across the country to a place neither of us had ever imagined visiting. However, like before, we wouldn't let distance get in our way. Now it should be noted that her mom did not like me. I still don't know why, but she was always the loudest, rudest, most annoying and disrespectful kintbag I've ever met. She was from the city, and she married into a family of farmers that owned the land since the 1870s, so that may explain part of her malice. From here on, evil bitch is EB. Another thing to know is that I have a great memory, and this will be important later on in the story. Anyway, back to the military. I had a 2-week break between my training and leaving for my first and only duty station, which just happened to be over Christmas and New Year's. Even though we were engaged, we hadn't really put any consideration into actually getting married. She wanted something small with her family and cousins, and I was completely okay with going to a courthouse and getting it over with. I don't want to sound like I was trying to pressure her into that, but the way I saw it, I would be living in barracks in a few weeks, and being married would get me a full monthly housing allowance, which I would save to have a wedding ceremony when we had time in another year or 2. Basically, get married now, don't tell anyone, because they would all get hella upset for not being involved, and have a fake wedding ceremony that would include both of our families and friends. It turns out that because I was living in barracks, I wasn't allowed to collect the housing allowance, and when 6 months later, they realized I was actually married, kicked me out, and made me get a house on base. Either way, we didn't get married when I was home on leave, and took an Amtrak train out west. I highly recommend traveling cross-country by train if you have the time. The first time we were able to see each other after that was during her spring break, which was the first part of March. CR and I finally eloped in a courthouse and spent the next few days glued to each other penis in vagina style, like every young married couple should. I flew back home for a couple weeks in June, and this is when things started to unravel. Easter Seals, for those who don't know, runs summer camps for special needs kids, and my new wife volunteered to be a counselor for the last 7 weeks of the summer. The last time I saw her that summer was just after her June birthday, when I dropped her off at camp. The rest of the summer was hit or miss getting in touch with her since she was on the clock 24 hours a day for 5 days a week, and I completely understood her commitment to those kids. When she was back in school the following fall, she became increasingly distant, making excuses about how her phone would be randomly dead at oddly predictable times every week. She flew out to spend Christmas with me in our new house, technically a shitty, mostly empty duplex, and things felt amazing like they had been. After that, however, she went back to being super reclusive like she was the previous semester. Fast forward to May 2012. I took a whole month of leave to fly home for her graduation and to help move her in with me. I barely recognized her. Every bit of CR's communication with me was forced and so phony that I should have known what was really happening all along. She had set up what she called mock interviews with a couple grade schools near her hometown, and I actually believed that she was doing it just to get experience interviewing. What an idiot. When I finally started to catch on to how serious she was about getting a job in our home state, she broke down crying and made it seem like I was forcing her to choose between me and her career, and of course I wanted to put our marriage before anything else. Obviously, I returned to base without her. A couple weeks later, I pressured her into telling me what the hell was going on. She fell in love with one of her fellow camp counselors and let the affair go on for about 9 months, with claims that she was going to tell me but didn't know when. The usual too guilty to tie your own shoes bullshit, and she honestly expected me to walk away from our relationship right then and there. No, I fought tooth and nail to hold us together for 2 months before filing the divorce. I'm skipping a bunch of sappy details here, but the divorce was filed late August and became final that December, mandatory 90-day waiting period in my state. The pain I suffered in that one-sided relationship is something I would never wish on anybody unless that truly deserved it. Apparently EB whispered all kinds of lies to her about how I joined the military to get away from her, and actually had the gall to blame me for all the crying and misery her oldest child was going through. My soon-to-be ex never admitted who was blaming me for everything, but I was really close to her dad and siblings, so I can't imagine that they would ever suspect me, but EB was so manipulative that by Halloween they had all turned against me. At that point I had it. I was near suicidal, and my anxiety attacks were hitting basically every day. I was miserable, tired of being lied to, tired of the slander, tired of being the bad guy when I was the one who was attacked here. It started with sending texts to her brothers and sisters saying, "Hey, I'm actually your brother-in-law. Nice to know that we don't keep secrets, right?" CR exploded, but that was just the beginning. I wrote a 3,000-word letter explaining in every detail I could recall exactly what happened, the fact that we were married, including copies of the marriage license and certificate, our plans for the future, and how I was the only one living up to our expectations, where she met the guy she was fucking behind my back, his name, address, phone number, camp counselor name, so CR would have a harder time refuting it, and a bunch of other information that she made me keep secret from them. I sent copies to everyone in her extended family, well, everyone I had an address for, her roommates, the summer camp she worked at, close professors she had brought up in old conversations, and the principal of the school she ended up working at. Calling the fallout catastrophic is an understatement. Her super devout Catholic family basically disowned her. Her reputation at her former school was shattered, and the tension at her new job was apparently high enough that CR was forced to resign from her position before Christmas break started. Getting those secrets off my chest was the most cathartic moment of my life. Story 11. This is about a buddy of mine, the most decent guy you could ever be lucky enough to call a friend, and how he got nuclear revenge on his cheating ex-fiancée, who dumped him for his best friend, all the while still being the most upstanding, greatest guy you can imagine. I've pieced this story together from things my friend and his wife have told me over the decade that we've been friends. There's not enough room to tell you how great this guy is, but believe me, he's been there for me like a rock when things were darkest. Cast of characters. Let's call my friend Buddy, the ex-fiancée Lisa, and the hapless best friend Richard, aka Dick. As you read this story, you have to always remember that Buddy is literally the greatest guy on the planet. Dick is, well, kind of a dick, annoying as hell, but my buddy says he always means well, and his heart is in the right place. Lisa is as big of a cheating, lying, self-centered narcissist as ever walked the face of the earth. Other people are Ray, another high school friend of Buddy and Dick, Jen, Buddy's wife, and Bob and Linda, Dick's dad and mom. All the names are fake. The background. Our story begins when Buddy, Dick, and Lisa are all in middle school together at a typical suburban high school outside of Southern City. Football team, Friday night lights, etc. The three of them are all in marching band, inseparable friends. If you know band types, Buddy plays the French horn, Dick plays the tuba. IDK what Lisa played. Probably the flute, because it's a cliché. Buddy and Lisa are boyfriend/girlfriend, and Dick is a happy third wheel. As they get older, Buddy and Lisa explore the physical side of their relationship, like normal high school kids do, while Dick is happy to be a player. He's decent looking, so he has no problem getting action, and also occasionally makes use of the professional women in their town. This will be important later. Buddy and Lisa, typical good students, go on to prestigious public university in Southern City. Dick drops out of high school, but a self-taught programmer, winds up with a decent career in tech. Buddy graduates college early with honors, and proposes to Lisa at his graduation dinner, with a small diamond because he's put himself through school, and that's all he can afford. She accepts. Buddy gets a job at fancy consulting firm in prestigious city. Lisa finishes college back home in Southern City. Comes time for Lisa to graduate. Buddy helps his fiancée also get a job at fancy consulting firm. During her last spring break, she flies up to prestigious city to visit Buddy and interview for her job, gets pregnant. Flies back home, tells Dick she's in trouble. He takes her to the abortion appointment. Neither of them tell Buddy. Ever. I heard about this from Buddy's wife, who heard it from Dick one night when he was drunk. As far as I know, Buddy still doesn't know. Buddy, if you ever read this, sorry dude. I should have told you, but it wasn't my place. The betrayal. Lisa realizes, when she doesn't want to tell Buddy about her abortion, that she can't marry him, but she's not brave enough to break it off. Instead, she ghosts him, and he finds out through the HR department of fancy consulting firm that she's turned down her job offer and won't be moving to prestigious city after all. Buddy calls Dick and Dick says, "Dude, I'm sorry, but it's worse. Lisa and I are now a couple. You can punch me in the face next time we get together." Somehow, Buddy and Dick decide that Lisa isn't worth destroying their friendship, so they stay best friends, going hunting together on Dick's family place in the country, etc. Lisa is not happy about this, but Dick tells her that if she makes him choose, he'll choose Buddy. The follow-up, Buddy takes a year or so to get over it, and starts dating again. Pretty soon, he meets Jen and falls madly in love, crazy in love, and to make things better, Jen is just as crazy about him. In less than 6 months, they're engaged. Now, the thing you have to understand is that Lisa is drop-dead gorgeous. She's not tall enough to be a model, just average height, but she's got these giant blue eyes and super long eyelashes, long, shiny wavy dark brown hair, an exquisite face, and a terrific figure. She's prettier than a movie star, and being beautiful is really important to her. Jen is pretty enough, but regular, and she really and truly DGAF. Dick travels to prestigious city, without Lisa, to meet Buddy's fiancée. He and Jen really get along. Jen gets along with everyone, and reports back to Lisa that Buddy is really happy, his fiancée Jen is awesome, etc. Lisa gets jealous and pouty when she hears about Jen's Ivy League education, but then Dick makes a point of telling her that Jen is nowhere near as hot as Lisa, so she'll stop sulking, at least until she gets an invitation to the wedding. Lisa pitches a fit, refuses to go, and tries to prevent Dick from going, but there's no way in hell he'll miss his best friend's wedding, so he goes stag. NBD, it's a super small, low-key wedding. At the wedding, Dick reconnects with another high school friends of theirs, a guy named Ray, whose date to the wedding was actually someone else's wife. Ray has a thing for married women. This is important. Buddy and Jen go on living their best lives. At some point, Buddy gets an Ivy League MBA. His career takes off like gangbusters. They pop out a couple of kids. Jen quits her career to be a som. They're rich as hell, still crazy in love, and blissfully happy. A couple of times a year, the guys get together and bring their wives along. At some point, Dick and Lisa get married. Buddy and Jen are not invited to the wedding, by the way. But the women get along okay. Jen gets along with everyone, and Lisa is happy because she's thinner and prettier than Jen, especially after both women have been through pregnancy and childbirth. The years tick on. Things get complicated. One day, this is around 2008, when Buddy, Jen, and Dick are all playing WoW together. Dick gets them on TeamSpeak and tells a hell of a story. Dick and Lisa have continued to hang out with Ray, their high school friend, who has a thing for married women. He's turned his eye on Lisa, who even after 3 kids, is even hotter than she was in college. She's leaned heavily into the MILF role. Meanwhile, Dick has had enough of her nonsense. He's decided to divorce her 3 times, but each time, when he tells her, she cries and gets all pouty. They have one last time, unprotected sex. She gets pregnant and bam, Dick and Lisa's 3 kids. Ray goes in hard with his practice seduction routine, and Lisa cries to Dick that she just can't stand it, and can she please just have sex with Ray? They do. Dick watches, goes in for sloppy seconds, and Lisa and Dick's marriage enters its suburban swinger era. Dick gives Jen and Buddy every gory detail over the course of a 2-hour conversation, while they're all killing wolves on low-level outs in Elwyn Forest, and Lisa is upstairs with a bottle of wine. It's obvious, during their next visit, that Dick wants to join in sexy fun times with Buddy and Jen, but they're not into that, and after an awkward 5 minutes, things go back to normal. The kids all play together, the women make small talk, and Buddy and Dick hang out together doing the normal things that guys do. Dick tells Buddy that the reason they're into swinging is that he gets off on watching Lisa being degraded, and Lisa gets off on making Dick feel like he isn't man enough for her. This marriage is not happy, but Dick wants to stay married, because Lisa is hot as hell, she's got a solid career, and he's a mid-level tech guy with a GED who works from home while he takes care of 3 kids, so he'll never be able to do better. Things get worse. Dick calls Buddy to chat. His marriage has gone to hell. Lisa has, in her words, met the love of her life. She's moved on from Ray and from the swinging scene, and is now having an affair with a guy from the accounting department at her job. She's staying out all night. She's ignoring the kids. Dick and Lisa take the kids on a swank vacation to try to focus on their family, and spends all her time crying because she misses her AP, and she doesn't want to be there. She doesn't want a divorce because she knows she'll lose the kids. She's drunk all the time, and she doesn't want to have to pay Dick child support. She wants him to let her live whatever life she wants while he does all the cooking and cleaning and childcare, and still brings in 50% of the household money. Lisa also will not SDFU about how she could have married Buddy and been like Jen, a som in a giant 5,000 square foot house with 6 bedrooms and a pool. I should mention that Buddy has also had a Neville Longbottom style glow up and gone from a nerdy band kid to a silver-haired, super confident high-level executive in a top-tier consulting firm, whereas Dick is still the guy working from his basement in sweatpants, covered in Dorito crumbs. He has been working on himself, but there's no way he can compete in Lisa's eyes, although both Buddy and Jen tell me about Dick's great qualities. Lisa is jealous, hopping mad, and she blames Dick. Dude, trust me, I know she is bad news. Leave her, Buddy tells his friend. It is the last conversation they will ever have. Holy crap, this is terrible. Buddy gets a call at work one afternoon. It's Bob, Dick's dad. Dick got drunk, woke up Lisa at 3 a.m., told her that he'd never loved her, that she'd never been enough of a woman for him, that he'd been visiting prostitutes during most of their marriage, and that he hoped she would go to hell. Then, he blew his brains out in such a way that the splatter went all over her and all over the bed. When the ambulance got there, she was hysterical, sitting on the curb outside the house, screaming over and over again, "Kill me too, it's all my fault, it's all my fault." Later, Bob would call Buddy to tell him that Lisa specifically says he is not welcome at the funeral. Bob and Linda, Dick's parents, step in to take care of the 3 little kids, who did nothing wrong and do not deserve this, while Lisa does nothing but work and drink. The coup de grace. About a year later, Buddy flies to Southern City to put flowers on Dick's grave and visit with Dick's parents, Bob and Linda. Bob is still in shock, but he and Linda have taken Lisa in as a daughter. Lisa's mom is dead and she's NC with her dad and stepmom, to try and help her through this as much as they can. Why did Lisa say it was all her fault? And why did she ban you from the funeral? Bob asks Buddy. What don't I know? What's the rest of the story? Why did Dick do it? The moment of ultimate revenge. Buddy thinks for a minute, and decides that it will help Bob and Linda to understand the tragedy that happened to their son if they know the full story. So he tells them everything. Bob and Linda have continued to do everything for the 3 kids, and they continue to treat Lisa well, because that is best for the children, but the clock is ticking. Lisa's remarried now. When the kids are old enough, Bob and Linda will tell them the whole story. The youngest kid will be 18 soon. Buddy is still grieving over his friend. Summary. What did Buddy do to get revenge on his cheating ex-fiancée? Stayed friends with the guy who stole her, letting her know how important she was to him versus the friendship. Moved on and married someone smarter, nicer, and less pretty, letting her know how important her best quality, only good thing about her was to him. Had a hell of a successful career, causing her much jealous anguish. Had a massive glow-up between 30 and 40, causing her much jealous anguish. Had a terrific marriage, causing her much jealous anguish, and also letting her know that the problem in their relationship was not him. Respected her boundaries when she uninvited him to his best friend's funeral, causing best friend's dad to ask the fateful question that, IMO, ticks this over from karma to nuclear. Proof that living well is indeed the best revenge. Sucks about Dick, though. Buddy says he was the kind of guy who would come to your house when all hell broke loose, clean your fridge, and make a 5-star dinner with whatever he could find. Nuclear vengeance wasn't worth the cost. I wish I had known him. Story 12. A few years ago, I was looking for a BotCon exclusive shattered glass rod IMUS. Prices on eBay were too damn high, so I turned to the Junkion exchange on TFW2005.com. I've bought and sold items there several times and have gotten great deals. I put out a post of what I was looking to buy and waited. The next day I got a message from a user I'll refer to as Shitlord or SL for short. SL said he had a shattered glass rod IMUS and said he would sell for $200. That was at least half of what they went for on eBay at the time, so I accepted and sent the money via PayPal as a gift. Some of the balance was paid via my PayPal balance and the majority off my credit card. $50 from PayPal and $150 from credit card. This detail is important later. In short, SL lied. He never had the figure I wanted and scammed me out of $200. I went to the TFW 2005 forums calling this guy out and asked for help from the mods over there. After doing so, I called PayPal. Sadly, since the payment was sent as a gift, there was nothing they could do to refund me. However, the rep told me since about $150 was paid from my credit card, I can file a claim with them. He told me what department to call, who to talk to, and what sort of claim to file. Awesome. He also put a note on Shitlord's account to be investigated. After calling my credit card company, someone on TFW 2005 emailed me, saying they knew this seller IRL, and gave me his contact details. Normally, I don't support doxing someone, but he's a thief. Fuck him. I called SL and left a voicemail and text. He later called me and tried to play dumb. Then he said his TFW 2005 account and his PayPal were hacked. Really? What a coincidence. I told him he should refund my money, or I would call his local police and have them sort this out. He caved after that and gave me a sob story how he needed the money to buy his daughter a Christmas gift. I didn't buy the story and threatened legal action. He had to have his girlfriend send my money back through her PayPal account, since his ended up getting locked due to all this nonsense. So I got my PayPal balance of $50 from him, and my bank credited me $150. So I got my $200 back. Here's the kicker, I never told him I filed a claim against him with my credit card company. Keep in mind, he only sent me back $50 for PayPal. My credit card company refunded me the $150, $200 total. So that meant they had his info too, and they would come after him to recoup their costs. A week later my bank called me and told me this seller was claiming I breached PayPal's terms of service and blah blah blah. I called the guy again and told him if he lied again, I would call the cops. An hour later, my bank said everything was resolved and to have a nice day. Another scam story I have come across to add here. This was in Christmas 2001, back when we still trusted the internets and eBay was a sure bet for getting a deal. We were looking for a nice gift for our 6-year-old, and having limited funds thought that maybe a slightly used PS2 console would be awesome. We found a seller with a long history and a good rating that had a console and a dozen games with it $4,300. Especially considering the games, this was a fantastic deal, maybe half off of retail. The seller was mostly into selling sports cards, but he had a variety of other auctions, including lots of video games. It would be our whole Christmas budget for him, but was too good to pass up. So we won the auction and sent payment. The seller replied with a variety of emails saying congrats, and he'll send it at the end of the week as he was out of town. A week goes by and we hear nothing. We emailed, and he gave some excuse and asked for another day. We emailed again, and he said he mailed it, but didn't have the tracking number, yada yada yada. As it became clear that we had been scammed, we were pretty distraught, as that was our Christmas savings for our boy. My wife wouldn't let it go, and has always been quite good at internet sleuthing, so she started looking through his eBay history, and noted that while he had been a solid A++++++ seller for years, many poor reviews starting flooding in. Many people eventually got the product or a refund, but it was taking longer and longer to resolve. She also looked through Yahoo Auctions, that was a thing then, and found a seller with a different name with the same items up for sale. Using that username, she was able to find an online dating profile that used the exact same username, had his picture, email address, and actual address double exclamation mark. This had gone on for a few weeks, and the emails continued back and forth with promises of eventual refunds and lies about lost shipments. And also she looked up the local police department in the city, and they actually had an online fraud department. She told him the story, and he said that they had received numerous complaints about a scammer, that others had tracked items to the city, but we were the first with an address. He drove to his house, and he was fucking there with a garage full of sports cards and shit. He basically got behind and started kind of an eBay Ponzi scheme, where he would get money from new auctions to pay back old auctions while taking cash out and getting further and further behind. It was crazy stupid. I think he owed about $10,000 to dozens of people. He ended up getting arrested and was forced to have wages garnished to pay back people and got community service. We got our money back, but it took a few months. Story 13. Once upon a time, I, almost 49 female, had an extremely close friend, Mindy. Hell, she was not just my friend, she was like a sister. We met in grade school. She pursued my friendship, always tried to sit next to me, always wanting to talk. Over the years, we would spend lots of time at each other's houses, but by the time we were 19, my house was our meeting place because she had extremely bad family trouble. My parents kind of informally took her in because they sympathized with her situation. I always tried to make her feel like she belonged and avoided luxurious stuff if she could not afford it, expensive shows, nice clothes she might like but could not wear. Other times, I just gave her some stuff from my closet. She was nice, outspoken, and made me feel like I had the most loyal friend on the planet. The years go by. I'm fresh out of college and got a nice job. Mindy's life has improved. She had her own place, a 9-to-5 very reliable job. By then, we had a group of friends, all young professionals trying to make our way. I remember that time in my life as bittersweet. We would often reminisce of our college days, and because this happened in the 90s, there were no social networks, no texting. If you wanted to get in touch, you had to exchange phone numbers or emails. Now it's fairly easier. So exchanging old stories glued us together as we wondered how things worked out for friends we may never see again. Gatherings and get-togethers happened in my apartment. I loved that place. It was spacious, still half empty, because I was careful not to throw too much money into decoration. Around those days, Mindy began to look sickly and quite not herself. I was worried and loved her to death. She had been there for me, especially when my fiancé broke up with me for no reason. I guess we now call it ghosting. He was the first man I ever truly loved. I was never able to get him to express his love like I did, but I accepted him for who he was. He had some cold stages which left me wanting, but I thought I could manage. Basically, I was settling for being breadcrumbed. He was gorgeous, successful, and protective. So when he proposed, I was on cloud 9 and decided to ignore the negatives. I had saved a lot of money for our wedding. To be fair, he did the same in a separate banking account. Things came to an end when all of a sudden, he broke up with me. He told me he did not want to get married and did not love me, nor wanted any type of relationship. He let me keep the money from our joint account plus some of his things at the apartment, workout bench, clothing, pretty much everything. This had a bad effect on me. I felt like he despised me and wanted to cut ties no matter the cost. Invitations had not been issued, so calling off the engagement was not such an ordeal. Mindy was there for me, listening to my pain, my rants, and endless sobbing. I lost so much weight I was embarrassed to be seen out on the street. She had a boyfriend, George, and he was awesome about letting me crash at their place whenever anguish and pain hit me hard. They both cut ties with my ex. I had made so many life-altering decisions for him only to be left in the dark. Mindy and George sat me down and disclosed that my ex was seeing someone else. I remember the shock and emotional pain. My heart was racing, and I ran to the bathroom because the bad news made me throw up. I never understood how my ex treated me like that. Those Christmas were so bad. I would sit in my living room staring at the wall. Mindy and George and helped me set up a very 90s posh concept Christmas tree to cheer me up. Only white lights, a few golden ornaments, and natural pine. I was so depressed the tree stayed, put until next spring. By summer, Mindy broke some devastating news. She was terminally ill. I was so angry. She didn't deserve this. Her diagnosis was grim. So bad that George proposed earlier than he had planned because he wanted to live in the moment. She had always dreamed of a huge wedding. It was her obsession. We would go into bridal shops and try as many dresses as possible when we were teenagers. The wedding of her dreams was now out of the question. Her family would not pitch in. She'd left their home on very bad terms, and George could not pay it on his own. George was now barely out of medical school and up to his neck in debt. I decided to pay for her wedding. It would be a small event, but I would make sure the decorations and her dress were as dreamy as she had always wanted. I still had the money I had saved for my wedding, and as financially risky or stupid as it may have sounded back then, I was sure those final days with Mindy would be worth gold when she was gone. Her illness made me realize there are worse things in this life other than being unceremoniously dumped by my ex. I threw myself into it. I was also happy and hopeful, as Mindy was able to go to her chemo sessions by herself without becoming too sick. She also looked much better than other patients. Our group of friends also helped her a lot. There was not a day when someone would not bring her groceries or help pay for a random utility bill as she was now out of work. I had initially offered to help her set up a better health insurance plan, but she declined. Pay attention to this, more on this later. So I decided not to intrude and give her the fairy tale wedding, or as close to it that I could, that she wanted. She had picked a nice rental dress and tiara. The florist was to accommodate her taste and create an indoor garden. The venue would be my apartment. The baker had been retained for a 6-tier wedding cake. There would be 35 people. With tables, an aisle, and a musician to play some music, we could not do the loud disc jockey thing. Now back to the insurance issue. My first job was as a junior sales executive for a health insurance company. There was a legal dispute against another insurer, and I was called in by the court to be a witness. As I was getting cleared to enter the building, I saw my ex. My stomach churned. I immediately thought courtroom wedding. By the time I reached for the elevator, he had already vanished. That messed up my day. I relived the lack of closure all over again. I could not let it go. I contacted a good friend who I knew was doing her law internship at the court district. She helped me by checking any legal records regarding my ex. No court wedding. I was relieved. I know it sounds silly, but there was a fraud claim, and he was the plaintiff. I didn't make much of it, but it was strange. He was very smart, and getting screwed out of his money sounded too uncharacteristic. I still wanted to help Mindy, and tried to set her up with a good insurance plan. I knew it was difficult given that companies treat terminal patients as money-dumping risks. I pleaded with my old boss, and he searched her name, but she was not in the company database. Maybe she was using a different insurer, but that was odd because she clearly told me what her insurance company was. I felt guilty because I was kind of snooping. Things were normal for a month, until my friend at the courthouse broke some disgusting news. The defendant in my ex's lawsuit was my best friend, Mindy. She asked me if I knew anything about it. I had no idea or clue. She then disclosed that the case had become popular gossip among courtroom clerks because my ex had fallen for a complicated Cupid scam. As it turned out, Mindy and my ex had an illicit love affair behind George's back and mine. It spanned a full year, and she was not out of work. She had been fired for embezzlement and larceny, stealing from an employer. I did know that she kept moving apartments, but I thought she had been trying to save on rent, so she had kept looking for cheaper and cheaper places. She moved around towns in the same city. First, she took my ex's money for some investment, and she used her former employer's credibility for it. Never got too many details. Then she got him to help her with medical bills, and scammed him out of close to $20,000. Her illness was fake. I avoided her for a week. I hired a PI to help me get whatever I could, without much hope as their affair had ended. The PI managed to help me get some closure. His name was on her lease for a small studio. Everyone in the building thought they were a couple. It was their love nest, and it was 2 hours away. I never suspected anything, but apparently he had been lying to me about his actual working hours. He had also helped cover for her car payment at least 6 times in a year. She had my ex as her sugar daddy. She had seen me cry, puke, curl on my bed, and had broken the news that he had someone else. Herself. My ex seemed salty over the fact that she had chosen to stick with George. It was simple math. My ex was very successful, but George, although not wealthy yet, had become a physician and was spoken for to start a small practice with a potential partner. She upped and left and cheated him out of money along the way. Apparently my ex figured out she had been lying about her condition. The disgust, pain, and disappointment hit me fairly hard, But somehow, I had so heavily invested myself in helping her that I had emptied myself of any potential nerve-wracking reaction. I was numb. I went straight to all the wedding vendors and canceled before it was too late to get my money back. I defunded her wedding. No cake, no dress, and no veil. I sat down with George on a Friday afternoon and offered him all evidence and proof. He cried, but at the end admitted to feel painfully relieved. Yes, he loved her, but he had felt pressured to get married. He confessed to many red flags. She always went to her medical appointments by herself and became irritated if he asked too many questions. She had shown him some test results that were incredibly well crafted, but now knowing what she had done, he thought the medical documents could be fake. He confirmed that the sneaky way, having his nurse ex-roommate run her name in the computer at where she claimed to be her doctor's office. It was logical on her part, as back then, a fairly small town had only one oncologist. We also suspected that she may have been having a new affair as she spent more and more weekends with her all-girls church camping group. She claimed it was her sanctuary and helped her a lot. It may have been a front. George and I accepted the fact that we had been cheated, taken advantage of, and emotionally destroyed by the same person. I personally felt a loss of innocence. Now I understood why she wanted to keep her wedding thing almost a secret. It may have been possible that making it public may have blown her cover, one way or the other. George and I decided to do what was right. I paid for a video tribute to my loyal friend and decided to send it to the local news as the heartwarming story of love and healing. It featured her and George's apartment compound on purpose so that everyone wanting to serve her court papers could find her. I did not want to see her, and I made up excuses, but George had a hard time feigning happiness once she had returned from her camping trip. It was an agonizing week. The news weren't showing our positive note yet, and we were sick with the waiting. It all blew up on Tuesday morning. The news channel enthusiastically showcased our story with a collage and lots of information about her, and how she was about to get married and had almost already beaten cancer. Dozens of ill-spoken haters popped from out of nowhere. As it turns out, this had been her second illness story. I never knew someone so close to me could lead such a scummy double life. My ex went straight to the channel and was interviewed. Oh man, it was pathetic. He poured his heart out about how crazy in love he had been and how she had only used him. I think by then he did not care if all our friends and families found out what he had done. George confronted her with all the information. She denied it, then said it was a lapse of bad judgment. She moved out without too much drama. It took George over a decade to forgive himself for allowing someone to make him look so stupid as a person and as a physician. She left me some voicemails with lots of excuses. I picked the phone only once and told her I had defunded and pulverized her wedding, and that it was me who told George what was going on. I used a leveled voice to tell her to never call me again, unless she wanted to find out how far I would go to see her pay for her unlawful actions. I cried immediately after I hung up. It was so surreal. George and I slowly found normality, but it took some time. He dated a couple of girls here and there, but was not ready. I myself became shut down. She avoided jail, I don't know how. Even when our mutual friends filed petty claims for all the money they invested buying her stuff, while she carried on her false pretenses. Eventually, I used the wedding money to partner with George, and we opened a small clinic. Best decision ever. Over the years, George and I became best friends and grew closer. We got married some years ago, and are proud parents to a happy family. Story 14. Jim, as I will be calling him for this story, is a regular customer at the pet store I work at. He's one of those people who smells awful and talks to you about 4 inches away from your face, and is just overall socially inept. Now, when I say he is a regular customer, I mean he is in our store practically every day. Sounds like he's good for business, right? Nope. Jim has a 55-gallon tank at home. He is in our store constantly buying new fish for this tank, because they all keep dying at his house. Oh, I should probably explain our policy real quick. Our store has a guarantee that if fish die so many days after purchasing them, the customer gets a free replacement fish provided they have a receipt and bring a sample of water to prove that they have a clean tank. Typically, we don't really enforce the water sample part of the policy, because if we're busy, it just takes too long to test their water for ammonia, nitrites, nitrates, pH, salt levels, etc. Usually we don't have a problem. People bring back a fish once, get their replacement fish, and usually we don't see them again. Back to the lovely Jim. Now, I haven't really had the pleasure of really dealing with Jim until this week. I've sold him fish in the past, but was not aware of how much he was abusing our policy. The reason for this, I recently discovered, was that he was practically stalking another employee when she was working. We'll call her Amy. Today I found out Amy has been dealing with Jim almost every day since last August. Jim even calls the store, asking when she's going to be there, to the point where she is nervous to walk out of the store to her car at night by herself. She warned me last week that he was back and he wanted the fish that just arrived off the truck. Typically, we don't sell the fish the same day they are shipped to the store. They come shipped in bags, and they usually need a day or so to de-stress. Moving them from the bag off the truck to our tank, to another bag, to your tank is usually enough stress to kill most fish. Jim didn't care. Jim wanted the fish that day. He bought over $60 worth of fish, including fish that you absolutely cannot put in the same tank together. But even though I warned him and advised him not to, my manager told me that if he insists on buying them, we have to sell them. I told him several times that our return policy is only good for X amount of days, and only with the fish's body and a separate sample of his aquarium water. I made sure that when he was checked out at the register, the cashier also pointed it out on his receipt. He actually came back to the store later the same evening, and was just sort of wandering around for about an hour. I asked him if he needed anything, and he said no, he was just looking. He was in the fish department looking over my shoulder for an entire hour while I was cleaning the tanks and scrubbing algae. He left without buying anything. He was just creepy that night. Fast forward to yesterday, when Jim came back to the store with some dead fish in a Ziploc bag. Sure enough, the smaller glowfish that I had warned him would probably be A, too stressed to take home the same day, and B, were not fish that could live in the same tank as cichlids, were all dead. He had his receipt, and he had the fish and told me to go get him some replacements. I'm sorry, but do you have a sample of water? What? No. I can't replace those without a water sample. We have to test your water before we can replace your fish. As soon as I said that, his expression changed, and he went straight on the defensive. Amy tested my water last week. She said it was perfect. I later texted Amy to discover that she had not tested his water for months, and that he was absolutely lying. Well, that's great, but I'm not Amy. If you want to get replacement fish, I need a water sample. I'd be happy to exchange your fish if you go home and bring me a sample. I'm in here every week. I buy lots of fish. You don't need to test my water. What I really wanted to say was, you're also here every week returning dead fish. You buy fish that are supposed to last 3 to 4 years, if not more. So unless you have hundreds upon hundreds of tanks, there is no need to buy fish every fucking week. Instead, I just replied with, I'm sorry, but I can get in trouble for not following store policy. I can't replace them without a water sample. You're welcome to buy more, but I can't give you free replacements. He went on, threatening to never shop at our store again. Oh, if we were only so lucky, etc. This conversation went on in circles for a bit. Me telling him I'm just following policy, here it is on your receipt, and him telling me that they never made him do this before, why now? I also offered to go get my manager several times, and each time he just replied with some variation of, I already talked to him, he says it's fine. Finally, I just told him, look, I need to speak with my manager to confirm this. I'm sorry, but I'm just following store policy. I walk away before he can talk back, and he starts following me up to the front of the store. The store manager, it turns out, was at lunch, but the shift supervisor was there, so I started talking to him instead. I had barely gotten a sentence out when Jim started the same fucking argument with me again. I stood my ground and said the same thing that I said before. I'm not taking it back without a water sample. The shift supervisor decided we would do a refund for the fish, but not an exchange. So he got his money back and everybody is happy, right? Wrong. Jim waits around for 45 minutes for the store manager to get back from lunch. All the while following me around the fish department, making comments about how I probably didn't even test the water in the tanks in the store. We test them every couple of days, and do water changes at least once a week. He also started harassing a woman who I was catching fish for, getting in her face and telling her that if they die we won't take them back. She looked rather frightened, so I quickly intervened, explained our policy to her, and asked Jim if he wouldn't mind waiting up front for the manager. Jim wandered away, but only for a few minutes, and then he was right back again. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the store manager came back from his break. We'll call him Nick. I let Jim and Nick talk up front in private while I finally had a chance to get some actual work done. Jim still doesn't leave after talking to Nick. He wanted the store for a little longer. By this point, My shift is almost over, and I'm getting seriously anxious as to why the hell he has any reason to still be in the store. What if he follows me out to my car? 5 minutes before I have to leave, Jim is still in the store, and I absolutely want to talk to Nick, the manager, before I leave. I still don't know what has happened between Nick and Jim at this point. I go into the office and start explaining in practically a whisper, because the office door is propped open, and who knows if Jim followed and is around the corner listening. I gave my side of the story, and this is where I really got upset. When I told my manager that I refused to replace his fish without a water sample, my manager came back with, "Well, that's not your decision, that's mine." I mentioned that it's on our receipt and that it is technically store policy, so I didn't feel that I was at all out of line, but it was evident we weren't going to see eye to eye on that one, so I let it go for the time being. This is the one thing that still has me really upset though. If I say one thing to a customer and insist it's store policy, and my manager doesn't have my back, it makes me look really bad, especially when that thing I'm insisting on is actually the store's real policy. He went on to tell me that Jim claimed that I had yelled at him. Not at all true, I didn't raise my voice once, and it took all my self-control not to yell at him. He also claimed that I had threatened him, obviously not at all true. And the icing on the fucking cake, that I had dumped the water sample he brought in down the drain so that I wouldn't have to replace his fish. I'm fucking speechless. Seriously? Thankfully, my manager and I have worked together for almost 5 years now, and he knows that I would never do any of the things I was being accused of. Jim was still in the store when I left work yesterday, and I haven't seen him at all today, so that's where the story ends for now. I also urged my co-worker, Amy, to step forward and say something about how he calls the store to see if she's there, shows up when she's working the majority of the time, and she also said that he's hit on her and has done things like touch her on the back or shoulder while she's working. I really can't believe she's been dealing with this asshole for months and didn't quit. I had enough in a day to make me want to quit if I ever have to deal with him again. I'm hoping that what he's done to her is enough to get him banned from the store. I feel that it most certainly is, but they might claim that if there's not enough proof they can't do anything. I wouldn't be surprised. Needless to say, I hope I never see that man again.